Pearl Harbor in '41, I was 19. I was at Virginia Tech, and that was turned out to be a military school. But we had 10,000 cadets and no women, and in '41. And my twin brother and I had gone down there because it was less expensive to go to an engineering college. And so he became an architect and I was a mechanical engineer. Being a military school, we learned all about drilling and marching, and they were hazing us like crazy, making us walk upright. The year after, we promised ourselves that if we were sophomores, that we would not treat the freshmen that way, and that succeeded. And when the war came about 42, they asked us to sign up in the Reserve Enlisted Corps. We had to go through basic training and then on to officer school. Officer candidate school is what I did. It started with the Coast Artillery Corps, and then they changed it to anti-aircraft, and then from there we spent about a week on leave, and then right after that they were looking for new infantry officers. So they sent us down to Fort Benning, Georgia, and I spent a few weeks there training, and then back to Florida to do some training. And Thanksgiving Day of '44, I was on a ship out of Fort Dix, out of New York Harbor, headed for England. While we were in the middle of the ocean, they opened up Antwerp, which had been under Nazi control. And so instead of landing at Northampton in England, we landed at Antwerp. It was under fire because Hitler had decided that he would level the city by Christmas that year. And that was the December 20th when we landed. Spent 20 days on board ship. Oh, terrible. It was a Liberty ship with 6 officers on it, and it went 4 ways from Sunday. So as we came into the harbor, the ship ahead of us hit a mine and exploded, and the ship behind us hit a mine that hadn't been cleared. So they asked us to stay on board ship that night. And that night, some buzz bombs came over. And you can hear them putting. As soon as it stopped, you knew it was going to come down. And I was told, and the next day, apparently one had hit a theater. When we went out there to try and help, there were still people underneath the wreckage calling for help and cigarettes. It's funny. A lot of British soldiers were in the theater, and they were showing Buffalo Bill, the film. And I was told that just as Custer's Last Stand, the bomb hit. And when well, anyhow, that it took a few weeks it took about 3 or 4 days to find our way to the being a replacement officer to the Company D, the 330th Battalion. Company D is a heavy weapons company. It has mortars, 81 millimeter mortars, to support the frontline infantry. It has heavy machine guns, which is the water-cooled machine guns. And it has light machine guns, which is the air-cooled machine guns. So I was assigned to the 81 millimeter mortar, and then officers were always the forward observers. He directs the fire from mortars from back the rear area. You're right there with the frontline troops, with the captain or the platoon leader of the infantry. And the captain or the leader of the infantry would like to direct some fire in a certain direction. Maybe they observe a tank or maybe some infantry machine gun nest or something like that, and they'd like to get some fire. And the mortar is just a tube with a pin on the bottom, and you take the shell and slide it down the tube, and it makes a steep arc and comes down that way. There were two men with me. One is a sergeant and one is a private carrying the radio on his back. Those radios weren't small in those days. I would use binoculars or something to find out where the enemy was or what areas they wanted to pinpoint some. And we always had a location on a map. And so I tell the sergeant where to shoot. They put down a round that that locates the first round, and then you could direct and say so many points right, so many points left, and that first shot would either be on target or below or up above. They would have to adjust the shell. They had charges, little packets of charges that they added to the shell going down. Those packets would give you a longer thrust or a shorter one if you took the packets off. My platoon had been together since training back in the States, and they landed at Omaha Beach after the first wave. But they went through St. Lo and that whole area, the hedgerow fighting and all that. They were kind of a smart team. They put together a thing called Fire for Effect. And that was, once you pinpointed the target, you could lay down 9 rounds, one here, one there, one there, and then down, and the guy directing that making adjustments for that was really terrific. They were really good. The first day a shell landed in a little driveway right beside the house we were in. I was on the outside window, and a piece of the shell went right by me into an inner side partition, and Lieutenant Tanglis was there. It hit him in the back, missed me. So all you can do is duck and hope it doesn't explode. And so he went back to the rear area. Lieutenant McKenzie was hit up front. The 2 sergeants were back there getting their battlefield commissions. So that left me the lone officer of the platoon, and Captain Barrett, Marty Barrett, the captain of the company, said, "John, you see that sergeant over there?" He says, "You do what he tells you."
Rue le Pic, dans le marché qui s'éveille dès le premier soleil, sur les fruits et les fleurs viennent danser les couleurs. Rue le Pic, voiture de 4 saisons offre tout à foison, tomates rouges, raisins verts, melons d'or et primes verts au public. Et les cris des marchands s'entremêlent en un chant, et le murmure des commères fait comme le bruit de la mer. Rue le Pic, et ça grouille et ça vit dans cette vieille rue de Paris, et ça chante et ça pleure et ça bat comme un cœur. Rue le Pic, rue le Pic, y a du bon populo qui se vaguenaude au hasard, et des petits rigolos qui viennent faire le lézard. Rue le Pic, et les Jules qui ne font rien ou qui n'en font pas trop se reposent dès le matin aux terrasses des bistrots. Et là-bas, Deux amants sans façon se promènent tout contents. Aux marchands de 4 saisons, ils achètent du printemps. Rue le Pic, sous les yeux amusés des badauds qui se trouvent là, ils échangent des baisers dans un bouquet de lilas. Rue le Pic, rue le Pic. Il y a des cabots et des gosses à poule-beau aux frimousse vermeil qui se prélassent au soleil. Mais surtout, il y a une belle fille aussi belle que l'été. Elle marche en espadrille et rit en liberté. Rue le Pic. Et la rue est toute fière de son beau regard clair et de sa belle santé, elle qui l'a enfanté. Et toujours, la fille avec amour à sa rue dit bonjour, et la rue extasiée la regarde passer. Et la rue monte, monte toujours vers Montmartre là-haut, vers ces moulins si beaux, ces moulins tout là-haut. Rue le Pic.
Well, they covered a 60-mile front, and when I got down there just before I was assigned to a company, they were talking about German infiltrators who had parachuted down in American uniforms. And so they set up a system of asking them questions to see whether they were really German or American. Things like, you know, who was the brown bomber or something like that, and the baseball players. And
so you better know your baseball.
You better know your baseball. You know, better know who the Yankees were, and so forth. So it turned out to be that sounded kind of funny, but apparently they were serious. A lot of them had infiltrated. They had done a lot of things to disrupt the trucks and signs. They turned the signs different ways and did all. I remember in basic training back in Florida. Of course, that was during the summer. They had just done D-Day, and so all of the troops, the new guys we were training, said, "Oh well, the war's over. We'll never get overseas." Well, sure enough, when I got there at one point, when I was being assigned, I ran into a private. He was from Marlborough, Mass., who was one of the ones that was adamant about not being over there. So I teased him a little bit. You weren't going to get over here, were you? We had one guy that was reassigned to our outfit from the 82nd Airborne. He went back to England with shell shock and came back to us. He lasted about 1 hour, and he was just completely shook up, couldn't move. I was surprised they sent him back to us, because he's worthless to us. We had about 2 feet of snow and cold as ice. You couldn't. Well, the Germans had the same problem. We had our own, just the regular boots, and jackets and whatever we could put underneath them. Shortly after that, they did try to give us some boots that are like hunter's boots. They are rubber on the outside, and there's a kind of a cushion on the inside that gave you no support. And when you put your feet into them, they sweated so badly that the sweat turned to ice.
Oh,
and so it was it was a failure. The Bulge was really a matter of chasing the enemy. And so we kept following the infantry. And whenever they needed something, we gave it to them, but in the first 10 days, we didn't. And we started pushing back the old German lines. And in that process, we were in the Hartgen Mountains. And in that process, we also took a lot of prisoners because their tanks had run out of gas. We had a couple of engagements where a Tiger tank got hit by a P-40, we called in a P-47 support plane. And he hit that Tiger tank, the thing went up in flames. It charged it, so that nothing left. The most grateful thing that we had after that 2 weeks in the field, they brought us back to the rear area and they set up this truck, this long truck. So you stepped inside, got rid of all your old clothes and took a shower. Wow, was that a relief. And then they gave you all new clothes on the way out. And that was the best part of being, getting out of the field. We set up a kind of a defensive area on our side of the Rhine River. And on the other side of the Rhine River, there were a couple of boats set up. And there was also one German that kept poking his head up over the banking. Drove us crazy because we was too far for machine guns to shoot. And we tried to use mortars to stop them from observing what we were doing. And one time we did, as the mortar, as you know, it goes up and comes straight down. Well, in this case, it went right through the chimney of one of the boats and landed inside. We have two kinds of charges on it. They have a delayed action one, in which we penetrate a building and then it goes off inside. And the main charge is one that goes on contact. So we used a delayed action one on that, went down and blew the boat apart on the inside. Yeah. We never did catch that one guy that kept poking his head up. We just traveled down these roads, and if there were prisoners, there were a number of prisoners, German prisoners, and we'd stay along the road, and from the lines back, the German prisoners would be marching back or with their hands up. And sometimes we'd make them jog, get them back there quicker, because we didn't have any facilities to take care of them, so we'd make them run back to the rear areas where they could be taken prisoners. They assigned us what they call cleanup duty in the Harz Mountains. That was from about Easter, or just before Easter, which is April. We went back, we were traveling with all of the equipment we could, picking up wagons and anything that would roll along this main highway going east to Berlin. And so the engineers are a funny group. And they went ahead of us, clearing up the roads of mines. And they put up a sign that said, mines cleared to the edges. In other words, don't go off the road, stay in the middle of the road. And then, so we were assigned in the Harz Mountains to go down and clean up what was left. There was one tank, though, that was kind of troublesome. And so we started tracking him down in this town. He'd go through the little main street of the town, peppering the sides of the walls with a machine gun. And so we'd try and head down to the cellar, and as soon as he passed, he'd come back up and try to shoot him with a bazooka. couldn't catch up with them until where a Jeep is trailing and there's a little 75 millimeter anti-tank gun on wheels being pulled behind him. And that gun never fired a shot until we got to this little town. So we parked him on a corner, and sure enough, the tank appeared. It was a small tank, wasn't a big one, it wasn't a Tiger tank. And so they took a shot and knocked out the wheel, and they had to stop. So and then there was nothing they could do, but they were.
They give up then?
Yeah, no, as they climbed out, they were yelling "Heil" and shooting and so forth. Nothing we could do but shoot them. And that was the one tank that the anti-tank gun stopped during the whole war. So, as we cleared out that whole area, we put up signs on the road, like the engineers. Krauts cleared to the edges. We ended up, finally, our outfit ended up at the Elbe River, meeting the Russians at Torgau, and where the engineers had built the Truman Bridge. And so I was on this side, and General Macon, he was in charge of the 83rd. Matter of fact, he was a Virginia Tech graduate. And he met the Russians across the river. The first time we saw women in the Army.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
They had women MPs in the Army. I had been assigned to an MP platoon about that time, taking prisoners back, first interrogating them and sending them back. They didn't give us any trouble at all. We had two guys, Max and another guy, who spoke good German. I think they were both Jewish.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Had one guy, Private Zimmerman, in our charge. So we learned very quickly, not to send him back with any prisoners of war.
What happened?
Because they never ended up alive back to the area. I guess it happened once or twice, and we said, that's it. Because he was mad. I ended up in Munich and saw Dachau, but our outfit didn't rescue any concentration camp victims. There were quite a few, and they told us about it. But and I saw. I ended up at Munich, being the special service officer for the Munich-Bad Tolz area, and that involved taking care of a lot of activities for the GIs to keep them busy until they could get repatriated. Yeah, we set up a lot of things. We ran 2 theaters, an opera house, a swimming pool, Class A circuit where the USO came in. Jack Benny, George Burns. We ran a transient hotel for them. And then they made an appearance at the big stadium there in Munich.
Now,
Jack Benny had lumbago, and he needed a hot water bottle, hot water pad. Munich was pretty well battered up. There were a lot of bricks on bricks, and people were spending time going out there and trying to clean up the bricks and put them away. They had a lot of restrictions on us. You couldn't participate in anything German. Just before I was assigned to that, I was assigned a job to cut wood. They had that winter was coming up. They had the coal productions had stopped, the mines had stopped, and so the whole city was lacking some firewood. So they assigned me to equip we had German prisoners or POWs manning two-man chainsaws. The chainsaws were American. And we sent them out to the woods, and they cut down trees and logs and piled them up on the ball field, on the soccer field where they held the Oktoberfest every year. It's like about 2 football fields. And we stacked it up with about 6 feet high of logs and covered the whole field. All the logs were gone by that winter. A lot of the major buildings like the Symphony Hall, a couple of churches in the center, the main Rathaus, the town hall in Germany, still intact. Even the Glockenspiel that went around, and where they had figures riding horses, knights, they'd come out with their lances and knock one off. The Glockenspiel would go around once every hour. And that whole Old Town part, they call it Old Town, was intact. Nymphenburg Castle, a little bit on the outskirts, was safe, and a lot of the churches weren't touched. I had set up a ski camp for soldiers. They'd come in on a Monday and leave shushing down the mountain on Friday. Some GIs had never seen snow from Alabama, and that was there was a camp up on Buchstein Mountain, and while the people in the kitchen were displaced persons from Russia, Ukraine, Lithuania, Poland, waiting in a camp outside, hoping to get repatriated to the West, to America if they could, because there was nothing left at home. I'm Lithuanian. During the battle, I ran into a couple of Lithuanian girls who were part of a camp, and then back in Munich, ran into a couple who told me what had happened in Lithuania.
What'd they say?
They said that the Russians came in and took over their land and said, well, we're not really Russian. We're Lithuanians being repatriated back to our homeland. And so the old peasants would say, well, can you speak the language? He said, no, we forgot. It was typical. So consequently, they had taken over all of the land, so therefore there was no place for the people to go but west. By the time I got home in August, I was ready to finish my senior year at Virginia Tech. Every time we built a new building, it was always using some new system that was less expensive and did the same job. New materials, continually updating. It wasn't, and if you didn't, it became too expensive to build, and you wouldn't get another job to do it.
John, how old are you?
I'm 86. I'll be 87 in July.
But you're still working.
Yes, yeah, only about a half a day.
Like
Each
it was
day.
like your work.
Yeah, it's. I don't know what I'd do if I didn't. My wife said, "Oh, retire, close the office up." I said, "What would I do?" So I played a little basketball. We ended up here in Wellesley in 1938
Played
when
against Wellesley High?
Wellesley High, when they first opened up the $1 million school, high school. Now they're spending $150 million replacing it.
A little inflation there.
Yeah, and so they let us in and showing off the beautiful auditorium. We used the Boy Scout camp over there in Hudson, Mass, and showed us beautiful proscenium arch with the blue velour curtains coming across. Beautiful. 35 years later, I was back here with my daughters graduating Wellesley High School. I walked into the auditorium. There was the same blue velour curtains across the proscenium arch, but it had lasted pretty well.